So Cody Berillo, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the journey. Let me just share a little bit about what the journey is about. The journey is just a show of having ordinary people come on and talk about how maybe they've had certain types of setbacks in their life and what was their maybe life before that setback like, and then what happened during that setback, but most importantly, what did they do with that setback and how are they living through that now? Some people it's like failing forward, or some people have transformed through that pain and found some purpose. And I know we've gotten to know each other over the last year or so, and you started working at KP Counseling in January, and are doing a phenomenal job with everything that you're doing here and helping people. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Why don't you maybe first start off with telling us, when Cody has an opportunity for fun, what do you do for fun?
Oh boy. What I do for fun, I'm kind of a really lazy person. I like to hang out with my family a lot, whether that be my husband and my daughter or my extended family. My parents live really close, like 2 miles from my home. So that's been interesting and good at the same time. And then my in-laws live about an hour away. So my husband's part of a big family. So we like to hang out with family a lot.
Good. So now, Cody, are you from the Rockford area or?
So that's always a tough question for me. Um, I would say that I grew up here. This is the place I've lived the longest.
Okay.
I was born in Denver, Colorado, Aurora more specifically. And then my parents moved us down to Florida and we lived in Kissimmee. And then we moved up to Georgia and Marietta and then back down to Florida. And then here. So I would say this is the longest place I've been. So I would consider I grew up here.
Gotcha. And so when did you, how old were you when you guys moved to Rockford, and any reason why your parents settled in Rockford?
Yes. So my parents are originally from Illinois. They're from the Peoria area. And so they always lived in Illinois until they were 18. They moved to LA and then we did all those moves. Um, my dad is an aircraft technician, so his job kind of moves all over the place. When Continental closed down, we moved up to Georgia, and then UPS offered him a job, and he's been there ever since and kind of taken him pretty cool places. So that's why we moved up here, and we've stayed for so long.
Gotcha. So then he would have been one of the original ones when UPS created their hub here in Rockford area.
So
Okay.
been there for a long time. So I definitely believe so.
Gotcha. And then you graduated from what high school?
Yeah.
Hananiga. Okay. And were you involved with activities at Hananiga, like extracurricular activities?
Yeah, so I was on the dance team and I was on the track team as well. I did band freshman year. I would have loved to continue, but with being on the dance team and the band, marching band, you had to choose. So my heart was with dance, so I stayed.
Okay. And so when you think back to that time period, what influenced you to get into the arts, dance, and then music, and what kind of influenced that?
I gotta be honest, I never, I was very uncoordinated. My parents were very concerned that I wanted to be a dancer. I'm very clumsy, still am, but for some reason I was able to be graceful when I was dancing. And I would have to attribute a lot of that to my older sister. We're 16 months apart. She graduated a year before I did, but she did dance and I thought it was really cool to watch. So in middle school, I kind of followed her lead and I joined dance as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And so speaking of the like lineup of kids, so you have an older sister and any other siblings?
Nope, just her and I.
And you guys are 16 months apart.
Yes.
Wow, that's it's close enough to be like kind of like twins, but far enough away that you're not, right?
Oh yeah. It was
So,
definitely it was really cool growing up, and even now it's really neat
mm,
to have that really close relationship that we have now. So
nice. And she lives around here too, or no?
she's in Rockford.
Gotcha. Okay. And then after Hananiga, what did you do after Hananiga?
So I went off to college at NIU, and I lived in the dorms there, and then we got our own apartment. my now husband, we went there together. We've been together since I was 15. So we went to different high schools, about an hour apart. But we decided to go to college together. We dormed 2 doors down from each other, which my father was not happy about. Uh, but we did, and we stayed there. And I did 5 years at NIU because I changed my major halfway through. So
So what was your major originally?
it was nursing.
Okay. All right.
So I just truly didn't know what I wanted to do, how I wanted to help. And in my opinion, in school, they really only teach you a handful of careers that are out there, at least in my era growing up. I think now they're doing a better job of teaching what's out there and, the more different professions that they have. So I just saw helpful, personality, nursing, let's do it. So ended up it was not for me.
Sure, sure. And then you switched into what'd you end up graduating? What major was you
I graduated
graduated?
with family and child studies and with an emphasis on child development.
Okay. And at that time, what were you, I mean, you wanted to help people. What were you thinking that and if you were like I was, I would, it was that broad. I wanted to help people, but I had no clue
Yeah.
what jobs were out there or anything like that.
Yeah, so they had us do, it was a mandatory internship at a preschool and a daycare at NIU. And I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do, but I loved doing like the developmental assessments. So I really wanted to focus on being a developmental specialist.
Okay. Gotcha. And that kind of came in reflection of the internship, but also some of the things that you were studying. And
Mhm.
so then once you graduated, what was your first job that you,
Well, that's where it gets tricky
okay.
because I got pregnant 3 months before I graduated.
Okay.
So, and we went on that journey first. And then I was still at my retail job in DeKalb for quite some time.
Okay.
So I was kind of lost for a while.
Okay. And I forget what your husband's name is?
Okay.
Ethan. Okay. And so you and Ethan have been together since you were 15, but you've been now married and have created a life. How long have you guys been married?
Oh dear. We've been married, it's 2011, so 9 years.
9 years. Okay. Okay. And so so yeah, tell us a little bit about that journey because is Ethan the same age as you or is he a little bit older?
Yep, we graduated the same year. It's just
Same.
I was the baby my class. So
Get you. Okay. And but Ethan was from where? Where did he go to? I'm sorry.
Crystal Lake.
Crystal Lake.
So
Okay.
we went to Prairie Ridge High School, and it was kind of a odd thing that we met. Um, my hairdresser at the time, she mentioned her cousin was moving to town, and he was a 15-year-old boy. He would be a sophomore with me, and she was like, "Hey, can you meet him so he at least knows somebody in the school?" So I was willing, and I met him, and his name was Colin, and he introduced Ethan and I because Ethan and Colin had grown up together. They were neighbors. I mean, they both had big families and they just were like brothers. So Ethan would come every weekend to visit Colin and then I would hang out with them and, the rest is history. So,
Gotcha. So it all goes back to the hairdresser being the
yeah.
matchmaker indirectly.
Yes. Thank you, Kelly.
And so did Ethan go to college right away too?
Yes. He went to NIU with me as well.
Oh yeah, you said yeah. You
Yep.
guys were in the same dorm room.
Yep.
And then and what did he study?
So he actually didn't graduate from NIU. He actually graduated from Kishwaukee College. He went 2 years at NIU, and then junior year, he came home, walked in our front door at our apartment and said, I think I'm going to go withdraw from my classes. I want to be a police officer. And it was the first time I had ever heard that, but he had said he'd been thinking about it for years. And now he is a police officer, and that is just, I couldn't think of a more fitting job for him.
Okay. And so he went to, is that what he studied, police science at Kishwaukee?
No, it was actually math education at
Okay.
NIU. And then he went and he just needed, because NIU is a 4-year college. You couldn't get your associates there. So he technically would have had his associates, but he had to transfer to Kishwaukee for 15 credits to receive a degree there. So he went and got his EMT and took a couple other classes, and then he just graduated with his associates in science.
Gotcha. Okay. And then he's working as a police officer, and where is he working as a police officer?
He works in Belvedere.
Okay. So he's been with the Belvedere Police for how long?
Well, 7 years, 8 years, something like that. We lose track.
Okay. Okay. And so you guys, you guys have been married for 9 years. You are pregnant, and now everything's fast forwarding, right? And fast forwarding regarding family life, but also career wise is now getting kind of maybe not moving at the same speed as family life is. And so tell us a little bit how you navigated through all that.
So it was definitely something I had wanted, was a family, right after college. But I had pictured a career first.
Sure.
I was always very goal oriented. I really wanted to be a working woman. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to carry that responsibility that we have as a marriage. I never really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And so but I really wanted a family. So we got pregnant, like I said, 3 months before I graduated college. He was testing for police departments. Actually, he might have actually been already on the police department at that point. It's been so long, so I kind of lose track of where we've been. But so I kind of put my career aside to start a family, and I was okay with that because I switched from nursing to child development. I wasn't incredibly passionate about child development. I liked it, and it was something that I was interested in. It was just something that was going to get me out of college without having to take too much extra time. So for me, it was just a degree. In the back of my mind, if I self-reflect, I kind of knew I would never use it. But at the time, you're telling yourself like, you'll use it. But so I really put my career aside and my degree aside, and I really encouraged Ethan with his career. So.
Gotcha. Okay. And so then Ethan's on the police force now. You're pregnant, and making a conscious decision. Okay, I'll do retail while I'm pregnant, and continue that path. Were you guys living in DeKalb then, or were you commuting back and forth, or what were you guys doing?
Yeah. So it was kind of like a boom, boom, boom when I graduated. So we were living in a home in Sycamore. My 5th year of college, and he was already on the force. So we knew we had to be within a certain mileage of Belvedere. And with me growing up in Rockton, I was like, you know what, I kind of want to go back there. So we actually bought a home in April. I graduated in May, but we bought it in April. So I was graduating. We were in the process of moving into our new home back home in Roscoe. I was still working in DeKalb in retail. And so I was commuting, and he was commuting to Belvedere. So yeah, it was tricky.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I know not exactly the same, but we had Diane and I had got engaged. We bought a home a few months after we got engaged, but I was in graduate school, so I was commuting quite a bit. I was working full time in Rockford. I was going to Champaign 3 days a week because back then you had to be in person. So Monday through Wednesday, I was in Champaign going to school, and then Thursday through Sunday, I was working at the hospital. And so there wasn't a whole lot of interaction between Diane and I. We had this home, but it was almost 100% on Diane also getting the wedding, which was probably good that I was just like not available to get in the way. So
That's true.
I don't know how I would have been an asset at all getting ready for the wedding. So
I would have helped out.
yeah. So so you're pregnant. Ethan's working at this time. You're doing some commuting. Did you stay working even after graduating? Did you stay working in DeKalb with that commute?
I worked there for another year, I believe.
Okay. Okay. So tell, I know that, one aspect of some of the setbacks that you've had was with the pregnancy, with the baby. So tell us a little bit about what happened with his first pregnancy.
Absolutely. So both my husband and I, we were super excited. We were trying just quicker than we had thought. Um, so by the time we moved back here. Things were great. I had my normal appointments, and things were going well. Things were progressing well. We made it past our, the 12-week safety net. So we were really excited. We announced it to our family. We announced it to the public via Facebook at the time. Um, so we got a lot of support. Everything was wonderful. And then it kind of took a bad turn when we went for the anatomy scan, which is your 20-week scan, which most people think of it as the gender reveal, which I used to too, but now I know a lot more than what I would like to know. But so we went in for a 20-week ultrasound, um, and the ultrasound technician just kind of dropped the Doppler and kind of got real weird and was like, I gotta go get the doctor. So my husband and I, it's our first baby. We're young. I think we were 22 at the time. My husband's, looking at me. He's like, it's gotta be twins. It's gotta be twins. And I was always really good at reading people. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Something's not right. But we didn't know anything. We didn't know how to look at an ultrasound. We couldn't really, I wasn't good at that at the time. I didn't know what a baby looked like on the screen. So she brought the doctor back, and he's doing the ultrasound, and he's kind of just nodding his head, and he's like, yeah, okay. Um, so then he tells us, he says, I'm going to go send you over to MFM. And both my husband and I look at each other and we're like, well, what's MFM? We don't know what that is. And he said, it's maternal fetal medicine, which I still didn't know what it was at the time. He said, you're going to go see the doctor. You're going to walk over to the hospital. He cleared his entire afternoon for you. And then we're going to go from there. I had no idea the gender. We didn't know if she was alive at the time. We didn't know anything. So here we are, 22, walking over, just kind of like, well, what's going on? We don't know. And I was very lucky that my mother worked at the same hospital. So I called her, she came on down, and we walked over to maternal fetal medicine. And I remember signing in, and I couldn't remember my own birthday because I was so just kind of like in a daze, like what's happening. And, of course, being a first time mom and a mom in general, you think the worst case scenario, like
Sure.
this baby's already gone, what do I have to do next? And here I am, 20 weeks, I'm already showing, and we're halfway through, so you don't think anything could go wrong because you made it past the 12 weeks, right? So you
Right.
think everything should be fine. So we get in there, and the doctor does an ultrasound. It's another like 45 minutes until they say a word. So it was definitely a long afternoon for us. And then he tells us that our daughter has high drops, and we don't even know what that means at the time. But then he's like, okay, so we're going to go over to the consultation room, and we're going to talk about what high drops is, what we can expect, and things like that. So we do that. We go over to the consult room, and he sits us down with our parents. I think, if I remember right, I think it's only my parents because I was so in a fog. My dad had driven up at that point. And he said that high drops is a symptom of a disease, and it's where there's fluid in 2 or more parts of the body. So for our daughter, we found out it was a girl in this consult, but for her, she had fluid around her skin, which was called edema, and then she had it around her lungs, which was pleural effusions. So which meant her lungs couldn't develop. So the fluid was restricting her lungs.
Oh.
So we couldn't figure out why we had the high drops. And that's kind of where the next step goes, is kind of figuring out, okay, boom, we have to figure out what is causing this fluid to build up. It can be a number of things, but it's really, really, really rare. And my doctor at the time had been practicing for over 30 years and he had never seen it on an ultrasound. So it happens in less than 1% of pregnancies. And it just so happened to be us. And we just kind of went on that journey. So after that, we opted to get an amniocentesis, which I had no idea what that was at the time. I most definitely do now. I've had several. So um, just to kind of figure out the cause.
And so at that time with the amniocentesis, that was able to give you at least some kind of direction of what may have been the cause?
So that was the idea, yes. So the idea was that this amnio, we would get enough of the baby's fluid and DNA that we could figure out what the cause of this hydrops is. Now, hydrops is typically a structural issue, a chromosomal issue, or usually like a virus of some sort. Like if I got a virus, then the baby was developed this and was sick. So we did all this genetic testing and all of it came back normal. There was no sign of anything that should have caused this hydrops.
Okay.
So we were transferred to a hospital in Chicago, and we were definitely a rare case there. We had an entire board of directors, a whole team of doctors, phenomenal team. And they did everything that they could, and they monitored us throughout the whole pregnancy. But every week we'd go in, we would hear the same thing. You know, she's probably going to die this week. You probably won't come in and we won't have a heartbeat next week. So she kept surprising us.
So those are not what we necessarily would call encouraging words, right?
No, no. Actually, if I recall right, my mother did not like this doctor. I loved him because he was so blunt, but my mom did not like the fact that he was very blunt because he was the first doctor that actually said the words die. He actually said, like, your baby is probably going to die, is not going to live here. Because the doctor in Rockford was very sugarcoating, very comforting, like, we're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
Everything's okay. And I didn't, now I look back, I didn't need that. I needed the bluntness. I needed
Sure.
the, you know, the he's going to die kind of word.
So just for a moment, right? And obviously this is, I mean, every situation is different, right? And even if someone has had a similar circumstance, it's still their own unique journey, right? And I think of the way that you're describing it, I think of individuals who have had a child, you know, regardless of the age, and they were diagnosed with a terminal illness. And there is that percentage that they may be able to go into remission, but there is a greater likelihood that that they're not going to be able to survive into long-term adulthood, right? And so so that's what it just reminds me. So when you were getting this news, you know, the statement from this doctor in Chicago, like week after week, that, well, it may be another week, but most likely. So what internally, what were you doing? I know you're probably still in a shock. And
Oh yeah. That was definitely very, very difficult for us because we had just moved into our new home. We had a housewarming party that weekend after we found out, like, your baby is going to die, pretty much. That was really difficult for us because we told our family knew, but we didn't tell of all of our friends yet and all of the extended family. So everybody was very excited and was like, oh, are you guys so excited? And so we kind of had to pretend. And a lot of that happened throughout the entire pregnancy. I would go to the grocery store and, you know, I carried big. You guys will find out more in a little while why I carried big, but I carried very big with her. So a lot of, you know, older people would comment, or, you know, people would just comment at a store or wherever I was at, you know, and ask me the due date and how excited I was and if this was my first. And so it was a lot of pretending and a lot of kind of dissociation, I would say, separating myself from it.
and in the midst of everything that's going on in society right today, with division and people being a lot of negativity and things, those individuals, random strangers, right, they're just being kind, right, they're just being endearing. but because of the circumstances, they didn't know what they didn't know. And so we still, so I still would encourage people to be kind, and but we don't necessarily know what everybody's story is. And
Absolutely. It definitely changes. My story has changed how I approach pregnant women, what I say to pregnant women, just because I know what it's like to have to pretend that things are okay. And I would never get upset with any person who's ever asked me and who didn't know, because you didn't know. How are you supposed to know?
right,
You know, so.
gotcha. So fast forwarding, your daughter did not make it, correct?
She did not. We had weekly appointments in Chicago, and we went in one week, and the morning started off just kind of odd. That week was very different. I would sleep on my side, and I would have fluid in my face,
Mm,
and then I would, sit up, and it would kind of like, it was really gross. It just kind of like dispersed evenly. And it all just happened in a matter of 7 days. And I had gained 20 pounds of just fluid in a week.
mm,
And so when I got to my doctor's appointment, I remember I couldn't put my shoes on. My toes didn't touch the floor. And I thought it was, normal pregnancy swelling, because again, this was my first. But I got into my appointment. The doctor was very alarmed. And he was like, I didn't recognize you when you walked in. You're very, very sick. Um, we have to make a choice today, right now. You have to choose, do you want your life or do you want your daughter's? So I developed what was called mirror syndrome. And it's exactly what it sounds like. I was mirroring the syndrome of my daughter. So I was carrying fluid. I was in major organ failure. I had blood pressure that was through the roof. So he said, if you want to try and make it, I doubt you'll make it to next week. But you can try. Immediately then my husband was like, absolutely not, like, get this baby out. I need my wife. um, and I was, a mom at the time, and I felt very helpless. So I wanted to help my daughter in the best way that I could. We had already been through, what I didn't mention before, we had been doing intrauterine blood transfusions for my daughter. They would do blood transfusions in the OR via my stomach, because she was so anemic. And then when I got sick, that had to stop, and I had to decide if I wanted my life or hers.
that is a, that is a position that no one should be put in.
Yeah. So obviously we chose my life. It took me a long time to stop feeling guilty about that.
Yeah,
Um, I definitely do today don't feel guilty about it. But it took me a long time to
yeah.
not feel guilty. So we went up to labor and delivery. I was induced, and then it was a horrible labor. I wasn't conscious. Um, I woke up at one point, a nurse was on top of me because she got stuck. Um, so we had an entire team in the room who was supposed to get her out and get the fluid around her lungs and put her on an ECMO machine, which they blocked the carotid artery and develop her lungs, which was very risky anyways, but that was our plan. But with Eliana getting stuck and me not being conscious and everybody in panic, it didn't work out that way, and she actually ended up passing in the birth canal. So I woke up to my husband telling me she's gone. They had been working on her for 45 minutes. I had to call it, that kind of thing.
Mm. Yeah, I can't even imagine, Cody. Like I said, no person should have to go. Um, so I'm very sorry. So tell us a little bit. Because we talk about the idea of with traumatic death, um, it complicates the grief process, and I can't even imagine how many different layers of complications. Yeah, there's certain things that the doctors were able to tell you
Mhm.
about the possibility of why is this happening, but even on a grander scale of that bigger why is this happening, and then the decisions that you guys had to make, and then even the complications within that. Tell us a little bit about the initial stages afterwards.
So obviously, when I woke up to my husband telling me that my daughter was gone, I was completely shocked because although we were only given a 10% survival rate, you never actually think it's going to be your kid. That's not going to be the miracle.
Yeah.
Um, so I had very high hopes going to. Everybody did. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Everybody was like, "This baby's going to make it. Well, it's going to be a rough journey, but she'll make it." Um, so initially, holding her for the first time. I had never held a newborn baby, let alone a dead one. And they're trying to hand her to me, and I didn't know if I wanted her yet. I kind of had to process, like, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. Um, and everybody's in the room crying, the doctors, the nurses, everything, just because it was such a traumatic delivery. And it was just so surreal to go back and look and say, okay, now I have to deal with this. I have to build my life
Mhm.
around a infant loss. Um, so I would say going home from the hospital without my baby was probably the hardest thing I had to do during that journey. But once I got home, I had to recover because the birth was very traumatic to my body. So it took a couple months for me to recover. My husband got to go back to normal life after a couple weeks. He went back to his job, but I couldn't. So that was a big struggle for me. Um, but I knew that I had to move forward. I knew that I couldn't be stuck on this. So it brought my husband and I closer, which I didn't really think was possible. And we really leaned on each other. Like if I would have a bad day, he'd support me. If he would have a bad day, I would support him. And, we just really, really engulfed ourselves in the grief process. And I allowed myself to feel all these feelings. And it was just very intense, obviously, because, we shut the door to her room, everything that was prepared, all that kind of stuff. All your dreams are gone. Um, so I would say just really engulfing myself in the grief process and really allowing myself to feel. There was a lot of crying, a lot of, embarrassment, disappointment. I felt like I let a lot of people down, um, even though I know it wasn't my fault. Um, you just have all those kind of shameful feelings.
Sure, sure. And even though you did have some college courses, right, in certain things, at that time, I mean, you refer to it as, embracing the grieving process and those types of things, but were you cognizant of that's what you were doing at the time, or now was it more looking back on it, that's kind of what happened?
I would say about halfway through, I was finally like cognizant of it.
Okay.
Um, in the beginning, I was just kind of like in it, and I was kind of in that grief fog. I really didn't know what was happening. Um, I go back and I really don't have a whole lot of memory of those days afterwards.
Sure.
I think that's just the residual trauma. But I go back and I think about it, and I think it wasn't until that grief fog cleared, probably about halfway through, about 6 months later, is when I finally realized, like, oh, you're doing this.
Hmm. Hmm. Gotcha. And so slowly, things, when I say normalize,
Mhm.
meaning your body starts healing, you're able to do things that you may have been able to do, 6 months earlier or whatever. And but emotionally and mentally, there things are not. You don't get amnesia, right? You're different because of it. Um, and so you move on, you're moving through life, and Ethan's and doing life, and you start rebuilding the marriage, start rebuilding the family, right? So tell us a little bit about kind of that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I stayed in retail for a little bit longer. My boss at the time was phenomenal and would just continue to put in vacation days. So it looked like I was working. So I would get paid a little bit here and there. And he was really, really, really amazing. So I continued to work in retail. And then once I kind of rebuilt myself back up and Ethan built himself back up, we decided, all right, I think it's time to try again. I think we can do this again. You know, we were told, we never found out a reason why Eliana had the high drops and why she actually died. So they just assumed that it was a fluke and that it happens in less than 1% of pregnancies anyhow. So you guys should be safe. You're fine. So we get pregnant again. And at this point, I was in a job transition. I started as an administrative assistant for a financial firm because that job just kind of fell in my lap. And I was so lost at the time that I took it and I was like, sure, let's do this. So I started working there. I found out shortly after working there, I was pregnant. And that would have been with Adeline. And so it was very a nerve-wracking pregnancy that I was very closely monitored, ultrasounds weekly, same kind of deal, just very closely monitored. And I was at a regular OB. I didn't have to have a specialist, which was really cool. So I actually delivered here in Rockford. The 20-week scan was healthy. Everything was healthy. And then I had Adeline actually right after the Super Bowl. So we felt like we finally did it. It was really a really cool feeling.
And how old is Adeline now?
Oh, she's 4.5.
So 4.5, and absolutely beautiful. You just posted some pictures of the three of you guys, and it just absolutely beautiful. And so 4.5, she's in like a preschool, right? So okay, so that feeling, and I've had other families, moms and dads, feel like, okay, not knowing that uncertainty, especially if it's the first pregnancy, right? And then it's just not knowing, and so now it's the three of you guys, and she's healthy and everything's kind of moving along, but that isn't the end of the story, though.
Unfortunately, that is not the end. So everything was great, moving along. I got back from maternity leave. I worked the same job as administrative assistant. We're just kind of getting into our regular lives, like what our new normal was. Like I said, my daughter was really young. She was only 6 months old. And then we found out, holy moly, we're pregnant again. So it was definitely a shock to us, but we were very excited because we had a successful pregnancy. So we were like, this is really cool. We're going to be growing our family. We're very excited. We told our family, and it turns out my sister was pregnant at the same time. So we were 2 weeks apart, which was so unique to do and very cool. I loved it. It was her first, but my technically third at the time, but hopefully second living child. So I was very, very excited. Um, so when we found out we were pregnant with her, everybody was very excited because we had a healthy pregnancy. So nobody had any suspicion anything could go wrong. But same deal. We had a really good first half of the pregnancy, and then at our 20-week ultrasound, the gender reveal, we found out, in fact, it was another girl, but this time she also had high drops.
Okay.
So yeah, that was tough.
And so then that wave of fear comes back in,
Oh, absolutely.
and I'm guessing even more now, that idea that what was the percentage of babies that survive?
It was a 10% survival rate.
Yeah, and my guess is that wasn't necessarily you. I know for me, I don't know if I would think I would. Round two, I don't know if I would be as confident. I may act confident, but I don't know on the inside if I would be as confident.
Yeah, most definitely. I certainly acted confident, but I was not. I did not have hope. It was it was a really dark pregnancy, just because with Eliana, as hard as it was being our first child, I didn't already have a child to know what that bond was like.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew having a bond with Adeline, what I would be missing out on once Avery came, and she did end up passing away. But before that, we actually were able to find a cause and as to why this is happening for us. It just so happened that just a couple weeks after our ultrasound, this lab in Washington, D.C. released this brand new chromosomal test. And we were the first ones to ever order it on the market. It was very expensive, but luckily they made a bit of a mistake. So we didn't have to pay as much as what we were having to. So we did this test. It took 9 weeks to get back. And in the middle of this test, we found out that not only did Avery have high drops, she also had what's called Turner syndrome. So if she was born, she wouldn't be healthy. For those unfamiliar with Turner syndrome, it's more of a physical disease. It's not any sort of intellectual inabilities. It's more of the physical inabilities. So she would be shorter in stature, she'd have a wider neck, those kinds of things. So she might have some delayed speech, just things like that. So we knew that that would be a challenge in and of itself if she made it, but we were willing to take on that challenge. So we were offered termination, but we denied because we were like, let's see where this goes. Let's try this again.
And yeah, so tell us how was Avery? Did Avery go full term?
So we were 33 weeks with her, and I walked in again, and I was very sick. He monitored me a lot closer this time.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of carrying the fluid throughout my body, I carried it all in the amniotic sac. So I was giant with her. People would be like, "Wait, there's not more than one baby in there?" I'm like, "No." People almost didn't believe me that there was only one child in there, but she was swimming in this just giant pool of fluid. So a normal woman is supposed to have about 20 centimeters of fluid at the end of their pregnancy, 20 to 25, and I had over 60.
Oh goodness! So about three times the amount.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about delivery, the higher amount of fluid you have, the more risk you have. So my doctor was very cautious in telling me, but he still had to tell me that he wasn't sure that I would make it out of my C-section.
That you physically would not make it. So once again, the mom, are at risk, as well as obviously the baby. Avery's at risk as well.
Absolutely. So once again, I was facing her, and I had already had a healthy child. But this time we didn't tell our family. I don't know if that was a good choice or a bad choice at this point. But we didn't want to worry them even more than they already had to be worried. So my husband and I knew that there was a good chance I wouldn't make it out of the C-section, but our families did not. So we had a wonderful team of doctors and nurses. They actually hired this professional photographer to follow us around for the entire day and capture everything, which was amazing. And there's pictures that are hard for me to still look at, but pictures of me hugging my family and my sister and my dad and everybody, and even Adeline, and me thinking this might be the last time I'm hugging them, and they have no idea.
So sometime I'm going to have Ethan on the show so that I can get a dad / husband's perspective on this, because I can't even imagine what he must have been feeling like, and knowing that you guys had agreed not to, share that with anybody. So yeah, I can't even imagine. So. So you go to have the C-section. Obviously, you get through the C-section, but what happens with Avery?
So Avery gave us a run for our money. She gave us a lot of hope. She came out and she was crying, which they did not think she could do because she didn't have that lung capacity.
Mm-hmm.
She came out, she was crying. It was so beautiful to listen to. And then immediately they had to start working on her to get her where she could breathe on her own. So they took her over to the table, and the entire NICU team was phenomenal. They were working on her. We had already had a bunch of appointments with the doctors to say we wanted quality of life over quantity of life. So if they didn't think she would truly make it, I don't want her going up to the NICU. I would rather her die in our arms. So we had made that choice prior, and our neonatologist was very aware of that. So she came out, like I said, crying, but she had an APGAR score of 6 out of 7, which was wonderful. That's almost like a healthy child. Um, so, the nurses are going out and telling our parents, like, oh my gosh, she's trying. She's got a really high APGAR score, um, and then all of a sudden it kind of took a turn for the worse again. So they put her on. They did a thoracentesis where they took the fluid from her lungs, and she wasn't trying to breathe on her own. So they hooked her up to some oxygen, and then the neonatologist came over and talked to Ethan and I to decide, okay, so this is the deal. This is what's happening. She's not trying to breathe on her own. I don't think she'll be able to breathe on her own. What do you want to do? So both Ethan and I just kind of look at each other, and we both know the plan, but neither one of us can verbalize it. And so I looked at Ethan and I said, you have to make this choice. And I know that was so heavy to put on him, but I couldn't live with myself if we had different choices and my choice was first. So he actually said, we're going to let her go. And I looked at him and we both started crying. And that was when it was like, okay, we both had the same choice in our minds. We have a plan, but when it comes to actually executing that plan, when it's your child, so much of you is screaming, like, do everything you can.
Right.
A lot of us also had to scream, we have to give her quality of life over quantity.
Right. And yeah, and I can't even imagine being in that situation, even though you do have a plan, even though you've probably had multiple discussions about what to do with all these different things. And maybe even we could go as far as saying, like, you guys had trained with each other for those moments, but that doesn't necessarily mean with all that adrenaline, with everything that's happening, that it's easy to still do that.
Right. Well, and especially because we had so much hope, and then it just, because we went in with no hope, and then she gave us hope, and then it was like, oh wait, never mind.
Right. Just the emotional roller coaster of that.
So we ended up, they had her on oxygen, they gave her to us, and then we were wheeled back to our room where it was just the two of us, where they removed her oxygen. So at that point, it was just her, me, and Ethan, just sitting there with her, kind of spending some time. And at this time, it was flu season, so kids were not allowed in the hospital, but they made an exception for Adeline. I know we got a lot of dirty looks from other families, but they didn't understand the situation, which is fine. But so Adeline got to come in and meet her and get pictures with her and everything while she was still living and breathing. So that was really, I don't even have a word for it. Surreal and just beautiful to watch. Adeline was 1 at the time, because their birthdays were only 3 weeks apart. So it was just so cool for her to like meet her younger sister and just, because we knew she wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise. So at that point, we brought everybody else in. Everybody got their chance to hold her and talk to her, and while she was still breathing. And then they would come in quite often, and they would take her heart rate, and it was just lowering and lowering and lowering. And then finally, it took a long time for me to get over this part, but I fell asleep because I couldn't hang on any longer, because of all the medication from the and just everything in general. I fell asleep, and I woke up and she had already passed. So I was angry at everybody because nobody bothered to wake me up, but I got over that. I was fine with it. And I was always afraid to ask, like, whose arms she died in, because our whole family was there. And then later on, I found out it was my husband's. So I thought that was what I needed, for sure.
So, and the odds are, right, listening to you as a mom, the odds are if you would have been awake, you would have been holding her. Mm-hmm. So maybe it was the way it was supposed to be.
I think so.
Yeah. So, but this time the grieving process is going to be a little bit different, right? Yeah. I'm sorry, say again.
No, I pushed it away for sure.
Okay. And it's going to be different because you have a little 1-year-old distraction running around, or at least moving around, right? So tell us a little bit about that, and then, but also that grieving process has led to you really making some major changes in your life. You're not an executive assistant anymore. You're not, unless that's your role with Ethan, but that's a different story. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. So after we got home with Avery and funeral home, everything, like all that was finished. I was still in the same job. I went back after maternity leave, and I couldn't grieve. Every time I would try and cry. I would try and do all this. I just couldn't. I think I put a block up to say, you already did this. You built your life up. You built yourself up from the ground up 2 years ago, and here we have to do it again. So I really, really pushed it away. I pushed Ethan away. I engulfed myself into my daughter too much, where the only role I knew how to be was a mom. I forgot how to be a wife. I forgot how to be a worker. I forgot how to be a daughter. I forgot how to be an aunt, because my sister had her son shortly after. I really struggled with that. And it took a long time for me to have a bond with him. And now he's my little buddy, so I love him more than anything. But so I really, really pushed it away, and I figured out that this is when I need to seek counseling. This is when I need to seek somebody who specializes in grief, who's familiar, maybe not with my story, but with familiar with the darkness. And so I did. I sought grief counseling. I started going, and probably about 6 months in, just a light bulb went off in my head and was like, oh my gosh, this is what you're supposed to be doing with your life. You're supposed to be a grief counselor. I was always one where people trusted or came to advice for, but I never saw that as a skill. I never thought of it as a skill. And here I am sitting in grief counseling, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. I want to be this for somebody, because the way that my therapist changed my life and held that flashlight for me was just something I could never repay them for. So I wanted to hold the flashlight for somebody else. Mm-hmm. So I started on a journey. I still worked as an assistant, but I decided I want to look into master's programs. I want to go back to school, and I want to be a therapist, and I want to specialize in grief. So I did. I did a lot of my homework with Adeline. It was not easy, but I did, and I got out and I graduated, and I mean, now I'm here, and it's just so surreal. It's really, really cool to be on this journey. And I also work with the Haven Network too, which is a perinatal hospice and bereavement center. So I work for the family services side as a volunteer there. So anytime there's a fetal death, I go up to the hospital if I'm on call. I take care of baby, do handprints, footprints, things like that, and then hand baby back to mom and dad, and kind of be there for them. And then I'm also their therapist that I do on a volunteer basis as well. So in my spare time, I do counsel other parents who have lost babies.
In 6 months ago, it was probably 6 months ago, because it was the beginning of COVID. I was doing some research on, how to go through the healing process of the grief that we are all facing because of the pandemic and because of all the different things happening. And interestingly enough, it led me back to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work regarding the 5 stages. And that kind of opened up me to David Kessler's work when he came and started working with Ross, and his journey of his own loss when he was working with Elizabeth, and his son died from an overdose. And as he was going through that grieving process, I'm not 100% sure, but it was kind of like there was a light bulb that went off as well. And he then added to Ross's work and stated that the 6th stage of what used to be 5 stages is a sense of meaning that comes from it. And I think for some people that may be listening, it's like, how could there ever be meaning that comes from it? And it's never about the idea that I prefer that the loss happened. It's that as a result of the loss and going through it, something that came from it that wouldn't have come if the loss would have never happened. And I've had other people, Xavier Whitford and Laura Gabriella and different individuals that have most recently been on the show, because in that case, death by suicide of their sons gave them a sense of purpose, of what can I do, where they wouldn't have necessarily done that. And that sounds very much part of your journey. Had been, obviously you much rather have 4 little ones running around your house, or three little ones running around your house. I just let the cat out of the bag because you're because you're pregnant currently and expecting in February, and so and then there'll be 2 little ones running around and everything, because you've been kind of keeping me updated about that things are healthy and moving along, and the way fully developing, and the way that allow that to happen. Cody, you have been working at KP for the last 9 months, right? Going on 10 months now. Yeah. And very much that your own journey of grief and your own journey of yourself has allowed you to be that light for other people in that darkness. So I definitely appreciate that. As we are kind of wrapping up right now, and I would love to have you come on in the future and tell us, just as you continue developing as a therapist, here at KP and for the Rockford community, but then also as you continue growing as a wife and a mom and as a woman. I would love to get your perspective about that, in the future sometime, if you're open to that. But if you were going to share something for either for a mom or for a family or a dad or anybody going through that grieving process, what would be something that you would want to share with?
Without being too cheesy or cliche, I suppose, just to know that there is that light at the end of the tunnel. No matter how long that tunnel looks, no matter how dark it is, there is a light and there is meaning at the end of it.
Perfect. So Cody, if there was anybody, any listeners that wanted to get in contact with you, what would be, like, maybe through email, what would be the best email for them to contact you?
I would definitely say my KP counseling email, because I check that the most.
It's a great answer.
So it would just be Berillo, Berillo @kpcounseling.com.
Perfect. So Cody, thank you very much for sharing your story. I mean, I know that it brought up a bunch of emotions within me as I was listening to your story, and I knew it, maybe not all of the story, but I knew a lot of the story. But I definitely appreciate you sharing your story as well as Ethan's story and all the girls. So thank you very much. And well, I will see you later.
Thank you.